Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into the Brett Favre sexting scandal involving Jenn Sterger. It's a story that's actually bubbling up again.
Right. And we've got quite a bit to work through here. Accounts from Sterger herself via ABC News and Trez Owen's YouTube channel.
Yeah, the original Deadspin report that kicked it all off, stuff from the New York Post about a new documentary.
The NFL's take via NPR, even some psychological research from SciPost on, well, why guys send unsolicited pics.
Plus data from What's the Big Data on Sexting Trends, and a HuffPost piece on motivations. So quite the mix.
Definitely.
Our mission here is really to, unpack all this, understand the different angles, what happened, and maybe see the bigger picture about sexting and all that. You gathered these sources, so let's dive in.
Okay, so where does this all begin? We have to go back to 2010, really, when it first broke. Jenn Sterger, she was working as a sideline reporter for the New York Jets at the time.
Yep.
And it was that Deadspin article that really threw it into the spotlight. It laid out her claims that back in 2008, when Favre was also with the Jets, he had allegedly sent her voicemails and some pretty explicit photos.
Right, the voicemails. I remember hearing some excerpts, I think, from Trez Owen's channel, and you really hear what Sterger described. It starts off kind of, folksy.
Yeah, like a friendly, good old boy hello, as she put it.
But then it shifts, gets kind of uncomfortable. He explicitly asks her to come over tonight. It's jarring.
It really is. And, what's key from that initial Deadspin piece is that Sterger apparently didn't want her name out there at first.
Oh, right.
According to them, she emailed saying she wanted his behavior exposed, but without her being attached. And she made it clear they'd never actually met in person.
That's a crucial point, especially with how these things can get twisted, implying some kind of prior relationship or something.
Exactly. It cuts against that narrative.
Yeah. And the photos. Deadspin described them in pretty graphic detail, one supposedly showing him masturbating, wearing Crocs of all things.
Yeah, that detail stuck out. And another one holding his penis, wearing the watch he apparently wore at his first retirement press conference.
Wow. Specific details like that, they definitely make an impact. Moves it beyond just hearsay.
For sure. It makes it very vivid. Now, fast forward a bit. Sterger did eventually speak out more publicly. Her ABC News interview in 2010, it adds a lot of her perspective.
What does she focus on there?
Well, she really hammered home that she'd never met Favre. She was clearly pushing back against being painted as a homewrecker or a gold digger.
Understandable. Those labels get thrown around so easily.
Totally. And she shared that story about a Jets employee asking for her number, supposedly for Favre.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading that. Her response was pretty telling, wasn't it? Something like, I like my job, and people say I look like his wife.
Exactly that. It just screams, I'm not interested, and highlights how awkward and, frankly, inappropriate the situation felt to her from the start.
So it wasn't seen as some kind of compliment, more like pressure.
Definitely. She used the word intimidation, not flattery.
Yeah.
And she also mentioned feeling like she couldn't go to Jets management about it.
Why not? Fear of losing her job.
That's what she implied, yeah. Fear of repercussions.
Yeah.
Which really speaks to the power imbalance in that workplace.
And her job did end after that season, right? The 2008 season. Though she couldn't say for sure if it was connected.
Correct. She doesn't know if it was related. And she also stressed that Deadspin published those messages against her wishes initially. She didn't get paid for it.
That changes things, too. It wasn't like she was seeking fame or money from it based on her account.
Right. And later, in another ABC interview, she talked about the fallout for her family, her mom and dad being confronted about it, her sister getting recognized.
Ugh, that's rough, the ripple effect.
Yeah, she said she didn't see herself as a victim necessarily, but the impact on her family, that hurt the most. She just wanted to cooperate with the NFL and, move on, get back to work.
So the NFL, they did get involved. What came out of their investigation?
Well, NPR and ABC reported on it. The league investigated, and the main finding was that Favre failed to fully cooperate.
Failed to cooperate, meaning?
They felt he wasn't completely forthcoming during their investigation, so they fined him $50,000 for that lack of cooperation.
Okay, a fine. But what about the actual allegations? Did they rule on whether he sent the photos?
That's the tricky part. According to NPR, the NFL stated they could not conclude that Favre violated league policies relating to workplace conduct.
Why not?
Because they couldn't definitively prove he was the one who sent the photos. Even though Sterger maintained all the messages, voicemails, and photos came from the same number.
So Favre admitted to the voicemail?
Yes, admitted the voicemails, but denied sending the photos. That's according to NPR and the NY Post.
But no suspension from the league?
No suspension. Just the fine for not cooperating. which, raised some eyebrows at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Was there ever talk of Sterger suing?
NPR touched on that, but there were potential hurdles, like the statute of limitations maybe having passed, and her status as an independent contractor, not a direct employee, which could complicate a workplace harassment claim.
Gotcha. Okay, so that was then, but now this whole thing is resurfacing.
It is. There's a new Netflix documentary coming out, apparently called Untold: The Fall of Favre. The New York Post reported on it.
And Sterger's involved?
Seems like it. She's quoted in the promo saying, "Favre ultimately destroyed my life." Pretty powerful statement after all these years.
Wow. So the documentary is going to cover this scandal too, alongside his other issues.
Looks that way. The Post mentioned the promo shows alleged texts like, "Come over tonight," and "I'll send a car," which sounds very familiar.
Yeah, echoes those earlier voicemails.
And Sterger has this line in the promo, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them." Seems like a direct reflection on this whole experience.
And hasn't she commented on his other controversies recently, like the Mississippi welfare funds thing?
Yes. The Post mentioned her past tweets about that, and even a comment about karma when Favre revealed a Parkinson's diagnosis. So it's clear this has, understandably, stayed with her.
Okay, so that's the core story, but you mentioned some broader context about sexting itself.
Right, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. There's this SciPost article about a study looking into why men send unsolicited explicit photos. The infamous dick pic.
Yeah, what did they find? Is it just about shocking people?
Actually, no, not primarily. The study found the main drivers were hope-based, hoping to get similar photos back or hoping it would lead to a sexual interaction.
Huh. That's not what I would have expected.
Me neither. The researchers also found senders tended to be younger and scored higher on narcissism and sexism scales. But the primary motive wasn't typically aggression or shock value.
Interesting. So less about malice, more about misguided hope, maybe. Though obviously still hugely problematic and non-consensual.
Exactly. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it sheds light on the potential psychology. A minority did report doing it for their own satisfaction or to get a negative reaction, but that wasn't the main finding.
And how common is this kind of thing generally? Sexting, I mean.
Well, according to What's the Big Data, looking at 2024 stats, it's incredibly common. They found 88% of American adults have sexted at least once.
88%. Wow.
Yeah.
That's almost everyone.
It's huge. Millennials apparently lead the pack. It just shows how much digital sexual communication is, well, part of the landscape now. It's been increasing steadily since around 2000.
So it's a common behavior, but the why might differ.
Yes, and the HuffPost article explored that, looking at motivations for sending nudes specifically. Both men and women cited turning the receiver on or fulfilling a request as reasons.
Okay, common ground there.
But there were differences. Women were more likely than men to say they did it to prevent someone from losing interest, or, interestingly, to feel empowered.
Empowered? How so?
The article touches on the idea of the sexual double standard. For some women, sending nudes might be a way to assert their sexual agency, take control, boost their confidence in a space where female sexuality is often judged differently.
That's a really interesting layer, reclaiming agency.
Yeah, and the study mentioned queer women were even more likely than straight women to cite empowerment and confidence as reasons. So it's complex.
Okay, so how do we connect all this back to the Favre and Sterger situation?
Well, if we think about those motivations from the SciPost study, hoping for reciprocation or a sexual interaction, it's possible that aligns with Favre's alleged actions, even if we don't know his exact intent. It offers a potential lens beyond just assuming malice.
Right. It could be one explanation for why someone might send those kinds of messages, even if it's completely unwanted by the recipient.
Precisely. And putting Sterger's experience alongside how common sexting is, it really highlights the absolute difference between consensual sharing and unsolicited, unwanted advances, especially within a professional context.
And that power dynamic again. A star quarterback and a sideline reporter. That imbalance is impossible to ignore here.
Absolutely critical. It adds another layer of why it felt intimidating, not flattering to her.
So wrapping this up, we've covered a lot. The timeline, Sterger's consistent story of discomfort and lack of consent, the NFL's somewhat inconclusive findings.
The fine for non-cooperation, the fact this is still relevant today with the new documentary, and this whole wider context of why people sext and just how common it's become.
What really lingers for me is the long-term impact on Jenn Sterger. Her quote about her life being destroyed, That's heavy. It shows the personal cost, regardless of differing memories or interpretations of events.
It really does. It underscores the real human consequences behind the headlines.
And it definitely makes you reflect on power dynamics in sports or any industry, really, and just how carefully we need to navigate digital communication. The potential for harm is significant.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking back to 2008 or 2010 when this first broke, how has our collective understanding of online behavior, personal boundaries, and consent maybe shifted since then?
Yeah, and what lessons can we take away from this specific story today about power, accountability, and the impact of our digital footprint? Something to think about.